Hey everyone, Hindi here. I wanted to share with you some exciting news. So, we at RelationShift have organized the Your RelationShift channel into playlists. So far, we have 3 playlists, one for workshops, one for our regular podcast episodes, and one set aside just for interviews. That way, if you want some hands-on tools, you can head straight to the workshops. If you're looking for good conversations, the podcast episodes are all still there. And if you love hearing new voices and perspectives, the interviews have their own home too. This way, you can pick out exactly what you're in the mood for: tools, talks, or fresh voices.
Okay, this is super exciting because Hindi and Menucha did a podcast. If you've been following, you saw them, and they are sister-in-laws. So I felt like that was a very good opening for me to interview my sister-in-law, Mushka Kesselman. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. This is so exciting.
Yeah, it's so cool to be able to share this with family.
It's to your credit that I came to RelationShift. So yes, it is very fun to share this with you.
I think I dragged you to a workshop, right? Is that how this started?
You did. And you were doing a workshop. So I came to be your rent-a-crowd and support you. And then I heard this stuff and I was like, oh my goodness, wow. And the rest is history.
Amazing. Yeah. So that was definitely courageous of you to come to the workshop and then have the humility to see, wow, this is something of value and I want to get involved. So Mushka, tell us where you live and a little bit about yourself, just like the basics, and then we can jump into some good relationship content.
Sure. Okay. So I live in Atlanta with my husband and 4 children, Baruch Hashem. We moved here about 2 years ago from Crown Heights. We lived there beforehand. I've been in RelationShift for about 4 years now, I think it is, and have been loving it from the very first day. And I think this is such powerful, incredible approaches and perspectives. And I'm so excited to share it with you all today.
Amazing. So you live in Atlanta with your beautiful family and adorable kids, which I can testify to. And is RelationShift the only thing that you do? Do you have other work?
Oh, so I also teach. I teach middle school and high school. And yeah, I'm kind of in the RelationShift and teaching world. I also teach workshops, the RelationShift workshops, because I'm very, very passionate about teaching. And yeah, that's what I'm busy with full time, my family and my teaching, Baruch Hashem.
So it's a very full package. You have the education, the teaching, and the RelationShift, and you also do the workshop, which is teaching RelationShift to women. Amazing. So given that you have been in education for, I think your history with education predates RelationShift, right? Being a teacher. You were also a teacher when you were in Crown Heights.
Yeah, it's my 8th year teaching, Baruch Hashem.
So being in the teaching world and the education world and being someone that's really passionate about Yiddishkeit and the values of Chassidic as a Lubavitcher, you and as a coach, you've been exposed to a very, I think, a fairly common challenge, I would say. You can correct me if I'm wrong, where a husband and a wife will be on different pages in terms of their religious values and their Chassidic values. And this is something that I guess what happens is when you work with high school and you work with students and then they, you're there when they're in their building their idealism and their vision for their homes and wanting this amazing Torah home with the beautiful values that brings, and then they envision their husband joining them in that. And sometimes what can happen is that, they get married and maybe when they dated, their husband was on the same page as them. And as things unfolded, their values are kind of drifting. And that's a very, very, I think it's a very big challenge because, a woman can kind of feel like the ground is moving or, sort of the rug's been pulled out from under her feet. And she's learned all these things, starting with how an Ikeres Habayis encourages her husband to daven and learn and, you know, be involved in good things. And she's met with a husband who isn't interested. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. It is a really common thing that I find with girls and with women that I work with, where either, like you said, either they were not on the same page and didn't necessarily see that through the dating process and only uncover that after they get married, or they were on the same page and then life changes, people evolve, people change, and, you know, suddenly they find that they've got different visions of what they're looking for in their homes. And it's a really big challenge, like you said. And I think that first of all, there has to be that space just to start off for them to recognize, like, this is a big challenge. This isn't what I was expecting, or this isn't where I thought what my home was gonna look like, or where my husband was gonna be at, and just holding space for that first. And then there definitely are so many perspectives that we'll bring over here, hopefully today, to help and strengthen and still bring the peace and the love and the joy and the connection. But there definitely does first have to be space for her to acknowledge to herself, this isn't what I was expecting. It's a bit of a curveball. You know, just holding space for that. Having said that, and moving past that, there's a few different perspectives that we'll hopefully be able to bring today that could help in this situation. And I think the first one that we want to recognize is going to the principle of ownership and recognizing the idea of that we have different domains. What is within my circle of ownership? What is it that is my responsibility to take care of and make sure that I'm doing and showing up in? And where does my circle of ownership end? And actually to recognize that my husband's Yiddishkeit, relationship with Hashem, Chassidic relationship with the Rebbe, that is actually, it's not in the woman's circle of ownership. It belongs to her husband's. And
so let me, sorry, I'm interrupting you,
Sure.
but I just want to pause you there because I think that's already maybe quite revolutionary to say that. First of all, just to recap, what you were saying is, you know, there's that initial phase, and we touched on this a little bit maybe in some other episodes, but we have expectations. And in any situation where you expected something, and you got something else, that's a disappointing feeling. And that's a process to notice that, to work through it. And it could be, you know, if the expectation wasn't just an expectation, it was a deep desire, a woman who wants, you know, a home that's based on really beautiful Torah values, and she finds that her husband's not on the same page as her, that's, you know, that runs really, really deep. So that's going to be,
yeah, so true.
That's going to be something that she's going to have to process. And the natural reaction to that is to obviously want to control. To, you know, if my husband isn't doing this, well, then let me make him, because, you know, that's what we need to do. And I think that somewhere along the way, a lot of women have gotten the message. And it comes originally, I think, from good places about how a woman does play a supporting role in her husband's relationship with Hashem and the Torah and all of these kinds of things. So maybe she feels like it is her responsibility because she's, you know, Isha Kashera Isra Tzayin Baila, something that women are taught, where a real wife creates her husband's will. So like she can make him want things. Let's say even that. And you were saying it's not in her domain. So I'm stopping you there and I'm saying, like, that's huge. You know, I actually was under the impression that it 100% was in my domain. Right. So how do you back up your statement that it's not in my domain?
So that is an excellent question. And I actually once had a woman ask me this question, and she actually brought the quote of Chachmas Nashim Bansa Besa, that a woman's chachma, right, builds her home. So she was like, how does that square away with, you know, you telling me to not be trying to control his Yiddishkeit or trying to affect or, you know, nudge him, push him to grow. And to that, I would say, and I actually really love that she specifically brought that quote, because if you take a look at that quote, Chachmas Nashim Bansa Besa, that a woman's Chachma builds her home, not destroys her home. And when we can see from experience, and perhaps, you know, if you're a woman who's in the situation, you've felt the breakdown that happens when you try to be on your husband's paper in terms of his Yiddishkeit and Chassidic, when you're, you know, trying to nudge him out the door to go to Minyan or to go to Farbringen, or to spend his time with more important, productive things and not watch whatever it is, or things like that. If we go to understanding the Mashpia Makabel dynamic, so the understanding of Makabel means I am recipient, and anytime that I'm in a place of trying to manage his behavior, I'm stepping out of my Makabel zone. Whenever we're in our zones where we belong, when I'm in Makabel and I allow the space for him to be a Mashpia, that's where we have the joy and the connection. That's where each of us are feeling like we're where we belong and we can express who we are. And that's where we have the love and the joy and the connection. So when we step out of that role with good intentions, because that Shalom Bayis and the Isha Kasher Iseret Zayin Baila and all of those things, when we step out of that role, I know I could say from my own experience, I know I could say from other women who I've coached, the experience of it causes disconnect. It causes a breakdown when the man feels controlled or managed or judged, made to feel like he's not enough or not from or Chassidish enough. It causes a breakdown. So, again, going back to Chachmas Nashim Bansa Besa, we want to take a look at what we're doing. Are we building over here, or are we, in our desire and efforts to build, are we actually breaking something down and destroying? And I think that, you know, the idea of a woman being a Shalom Bayis and pushing and encouraging her husband to grow is definitely true. It's a Torah value. The Rebbe speaks about it, about women, about in this way a lot. The question is just, how are we doing it? Are we doing it in a feminine way, or are we doing it in a masculine way? Because when we step out of being a makabel, that's what causes the breakdown. So a feminine way would be, again, staying in my domain and staying in my circle of ownership and taking ownership of my Yiddishkeit and my passion and my desire and delight in my relationship with Hashem, my enthusiasm about it, my joy in it. I think that in itself is inspiring. And when a husband feels like there is space for him and his journey, and he's not being judged for where he's at or pushed or controlled to try to be somewhere else where he's not, so he feels like there's space for him, and he also witnesses his wife's delight in her Yiddishkeit, I think that is inspiring for him, and that could be a push for him to grow. So we definitely have that space to set the tone in our home and be that Shalom Bayis and all of that, but in a feminine way, so that we're not causing that breakdown that happens when we try to manage or control his behavior.
Fascinating. I think when we are looking at these phrases, we're not saying, oh no, we're changing, you know, RelationShift has a new approach where what we're saying is, if you really understand what we're writing a new Torah, if you really understand the wisdom that Torah is sharing with us, is that for sure a woman, the energy that a woman has in her home is the most powerful thing. Like we impact our husband and our children tremendously. Everyone knows this from growing up with a mother and from being a wife, that the mood that you're in and, you know, your whole energy just is the ambiance, is the air of your home. So in a woman's, you know, like you're saying, in your efforts to create a Torah home, a woman could be actually doing the exact opposite, because she's imposing and she's controlling, and her husband, and I think judgment is probably a very big word here when it comes to, you know, looking at someone else's relationship with Hashem. And judgment is always from fear. There's a lot of judgment. And even just looking at your own Judaism, like that's, I think that's pretty big, you know, for a woman to stop and say, like, 1 second, I want all of these things. Where am I at? And let me be the person like let me be the person that I'm trying to get my husband to be. Like, let me be that person, and then he can, so yeah, that's I think that's a really important, it's an important idea for a woman to reflect on.
Right. Just to add to that, oftentimes women might kind of think that when I get married, I rely on my husband for the Judaism or Chassidic aspect. So it's kind of like I can, maybe when I was single, I was like working on my Avodas Hashem or whatever. But now that I get married, it's like that's my husband's role. And then if he's not providing that to the home, like now we're all lacking and we all don't have it because he's not showing up in that way. But just like you were responsible for your Avodas Hashem before you got married, you are as responsible after you get married. And like you said, taking a look at, if I want all these things in my home, where am I at? And am I being that person instead of just sitting and judging my husband for not being that person?
Right. It's a good point. I definitely think there's this feeling of like, I have to like daven until I get married, and then my husband davens for both of us. Exactly. So then it does feel like sort of, well, if he's not up to that, then there's that loss of power because it's all up to him now. And just kind of let's get clarity on that. Your Judaism is still completely in your hands, and absolutely your relationship with Hashem is yours, and your husband's relationship with Hashem is his. And that doesn't change, just because you got married. Maybe we can bring like a practical example, because I think that like in theory, I could hear a woman listening to this and saying like, it sounds nice in theory, but what if do you have a good example that comes to mind of like something maybe a husband isn't willing to do that a wife really feels is necessary or important, and like how she would navigate that?
Good question. Bringing an example to show this playing out. I
have one that's coming to mind. You'll tell me if you
please share.
Like it. I mean, just from I know this from a client, but I would like to hear how you would, in the context of this conversation. A client shared with me that her husband, it was around Pesach, with she wanted a certain standard for Pesach, and she wanted to have her kitchen prepared for Pesach in a specific way that she was comfortable with, and her husband didn't find it necessary. So she was kind of caught in this, stuck between a rock and a hard place. He wasn't interested in going through, the process of kushering the whole kitchen and covering it. He wanted to do a shorter, more, easier method. And for her, she wasn't comfortable with that. So, what do you do then?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. It's a great example. So I think like what you were talking about before, when you mentioned the judgment being a big thing, that would be the first place to start, in that before we get down to the practicalities of what's actually going to happen and, how the kitchen will actually be, there oftentimes could be a heavy judgment on like, how could you want that? How could this not be important to you? How could you not want to do it the best, most, highest standard kosher way? And where that, all that heaviness and the judgment that's attached to it, first of all, shuts out any space for him. And second of all, is going to make her not open to like working through this, because it's got all this like heavy judgment attached to it. So first of all, recognizing that, he is his own person with his own value systems, with his own standards, where he's at. And like, first of all, just making space for that. I think, one of the biggest relationship, like if you want to build a real relationship piece, is space for another person where they're at versus like the version of them that I want them to be, the version of them that I've created for myself. And then, you know, getting upset or disappointed when they're not being that version. So we want to just, first of all, recognize that if you're looking to have a relationship with another person, right, a real relationship with, there's another whole other person over here, creating space for, he's allowed to be where he's at. He's allowed to have his values or his standards where he's at, and just holding space for that, first of all.
Can we just pause for that for a second?
Yeah.
Let's just, you know, let's let that sink in. Like, how much in wanting what we want and feeling so passionately about what we want, we forget that there's even another person
Yes.
that like has a mind and has a heart and has a relationship with Hashem and has a whole inner world. And we just sometimes get so, like, I'm sure everyone can relate to this. You get like so caught up and so blinded and so like stuck in what I need and what I want and what has to happen. And like the idea of this other person having a personality, having wants and needs of their own, and having, you know, just like it disappears. And like
Absolutely, yeah.
The piece that you're saying, which is like, if I want to be in a relationship that involves another person. So,
and sometimes we forget that. As basic as it should be, we forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at that judgment, seeing how that shuts us down, how that closes the space for there to be this other human being. So just like, okay, you know, let's take a deep breath, take a step back for a second.
Right. The second piece that I would bring over there is one of the very powerful principles to apply in general to the situation is the idea of Shalom Bayis is the foundation of my home. The well-being of my family depends on it, and it brings Geula to the world. And where I find this to be so powerful is that I used to have this idea of like, anytime my husband and I disagreed on something like Yiddishkeit wise, and like if I was arguing for a higher standard or I wanted like a higher value or whatever, then I was for sure right because, well, like I have Hashem on my side. So he's for sure wrong and I'm for sure right. And now let's enter the conversation from there. But like, obviously I'm right. I'm arguing for a godlier value. So how could you be? Like, it's me and Hashem versus him. My husband once even said that to me. He's like, there's no way for me to win over here because, like, you know, you're arguing in the name of Hashem. So there was something that really powerful when I learned this principle. Something that was really, really powerful to recognize is that Shalom Bayis is not just like it makes life more pleasant to live together with your spouse when you're, you know, having peace and connection. It's not just about that. Shalom Bayis is a godly value. The same Hashem who wants you to care about the mitzvahs is the same Hashem who says, I'm giving you a husband and you're building a home, and you guys having Shalom Bayis together is one of the highest values, one of the most important things. You know, if we take a look at the story of the Isha Saita and Hashem saying that, like, take my name, write it on a piece of parchment and erase it for the sake of Shalom Bayis. So Shalom Bayis in and of itself is a godly value. So if you're fighting for a higher godly value and it's causing a lack of Shalom Bayis, then at a certain point we've kind of lost the plot of what a godly value is over here. So that was something that was very powerful for me to recognize of, you know, Shalom Bayis in and of itself is something godly. The Rebbe spoke about how Shalom Bayis is like the final frontier of what we have now in this last bit of Galus, because the relationship between a husband and a wife is a reflection of the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people, like the marriage that started between Hashem and the Jewish people by Matan Torah, and the ultimate revelation of that when Mashiach comes. So how our relationship with our husband is reflects on the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. And having Shalom Bayis, in addition to just being beautiful and much more fun to live with your spouse when you're getting along. But having Shalom Bayis actually brings Mashiach, because having that good, close, loving connection between a husband and a wife reveals that good, close, loving connection between Hashem and the Yidden.
Wow.
So in and of itself, it's a really powerful, really important godly value.
It's so interesting because, I always think about this. Truths are very simple. So simple that we miss them a lot of the time. But when you're saying, a woman who wants her kitchen kasher for Pesach feels like she's fighting for the Torah. And in the spirit of fighting for the Torah, she might run her husband over. And when we take a step back and you bring up this concept of, it's Hashem's Torah, and Hashem puts Shalom Bayis really, really high up there. It's a core value of Hashem's, of Jewish life, of the Torah. So we have to look at that, right? Am I compromising my Shalom Bayis in the name of the Torah? And Hashem wants me to be in Shalom, and I have to step out of judgment. I have to step out of fear. I have to step out of control, right? All of those things that compromise peace. But I'm going to push back because we want to, and I want to say, well, we obviously in general in the podcast we stay in the more common examples. If someone's dealing with this on a very extreme level, something that feels totally outrageous, or that is compromising something that feels that it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about, obviously that would be appropriate to bring to a private session, right? I think we're talking in those day-to-day things where one person wants to be more mahudar, one person doesn't care for that hidur necessarily. We're not talking about her husband's asking her to eat non-kosher, right? I just want to clarify that we're talking within a certain framework. There obviously are differences. This is a very nuanced conversation.
Right. And this is a great clarification to make. Yeah.
In that more gray area where people have different levels of how mahudar they want to do things, right? So it's not an extreme case necessarily, but for this person, it does feel extreme because if she, but going back to our example, if this woman feels like in order for her kitchen to be kosher for Pesach, she needs to do her kashering and her covering in a specific way. So like, how can she give up on that, right? That feels it does feel very big for her. So she's kind of like, maybe she understands what you're saying. Shalom Bayis is so important, but so is her kitchen, being kosher. They're kind of neck to neck over there.
Pesach is a big one. You guys did a whole series just on Pesach.
I know.
It hits us very deep.
It hits very deep. Continue to walk us through it.
With those two foundational pieces, I don't even know if it means she has to give up on her desire of what she wants her kitchen to look like for Pesach. Particularly like her kitchen, she's cooking, like she wants to feel comfortable with the kosher standard of her Pesach kitchen. I don't know if it necessarily means that she has to give it up. I think it's that if she's pushing back against what her husband's saying or his desire of how he wants to do things with no space for him. So with judgment on him for where he's holding and why this isn't important to him, and without recognizing the value of shalom, then I think, that's where we don't want to go. Whereas when she's in a space of he's allowed to have his own space and he's allowed to have what is and isn't important to him, and she recognizes the value of shalom and that, they're both high up there. So her Pesach kitchen is important. It is. And so is Shalom. So they're both holding true and they're both valuable. Then she could, either request from him or find a way to still get the Pesach kitchen that she's looking for without it coming at the expense of a disconnect or a fight or a judgment against her husband.
Beautiful. So not necessarily is she giving up on her value. It's just really what we're talking about here is how she's approaching her husband about it. And if this is going to turn to a point of major tension and disconnection, which would obviously be so devastating. Whereas, she has a few options. She could either present it to him as, I totally get that this is not a value for you. And I respect that. Meaning she would go with a third way. And it really is something that I would love. So I'm wondering if you could help me out with it. And let's say he pushes back and really still doesn't want to, then she's free to do it on her own or maybe hire someone to help her with it. It's not necessarily about, I think that what you're getting at is it becoming a relationship issue where it does not have to be a relationship issue.
Exactly. And I would also say that if when she presents it to him with space for him and her desire, and he does choose to go ahead and help her, then there's actually a huge opportunity here for more connection and more gratitude, because he's going and doing something that doesn't even necessarily mean that much to him, but because she's important to him and he cares about what she wants. So, that same, like, he doesn't care for this, where we could look at that and be like, that is so disconnecting and I'm so upset at him for not caring about this. Or look how much he cares about me, that he would even be willing to do something that he doesn't care for because he knows it's important to me.
So that's a complete turnaround, because, this went from being something that could have been a massive sort of tension and friction in the relationship. But when she's created that space and said, okay, I don't judge. He has his relationship with Hashem. He's his own person. I respect who he is and I admire who he is. And I honor myself. I have this desire. And then I bring that to him. And then in the event that he does want to give that to me because he is good to me and he wants to show up for me, then I can celebrate that tremendous amount, that tremendous commitment and the depth of that commitment. And then this has turned into a point of really, really powerful connection, which is incredible. Who would imagine that having different values could actually turn into something connecting? That's amazing. That's very cool. I want to touch on one more point, and then we'll treat you to some rapid fire questions. Easy ones. But just one more point about this, which is, what if a woman feels, maybe this comes up earlier on in her marriage, or maybe not, I don't know, like she made a mistake, when they have such different values, right? Where, often people are encouraged, marry somebody who shares your values, and she thought she was marrying someone that shared her values, and then the whole thing's turned upside down. And maybe she just lives with this feeling of like, maybe I married the wrong person, which this feeling could obviously come up in a lot of different scenarios. We're just addressing it in this particular context of when a couple's values are not aligned and she feels like, wow, this is a mistake. Like, we should never have. And, it's a very, if anyone's, different women think it for different reasons, but when a woman does come across that thought, it's a very painful thought. And how would you, how would you guide her in this particular context?
Right. Yeah, that can be really scary to look back at this like major life decision and be like, we're holding in such different places. Maybe we just are not compatible and shouldn't have gotten married, or maybe this was just a mistake. And I also hear this from women who noticed things in the dating process and then either thought they wouldn't be big deals, or like overall the picture looked good enough, so they, dismissed it or ignored it. And then it ends up being a bigger deal down the line, and they look back and they're like, I saw it when I was dating. I should have
done something about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be a really scary thought when it comes up. Maybe this whole thing was a mistake. And to that, I would bring in the principle of divine design. I heard a line from someone. It was a great line. She said that there's one word that Hashem never says. Hashem never says, oops. And I thought that was just such a great way of putting it, in that if you and your husband are married, right, that means that Hashem brought you there. Nothing happens. Even things that we think are our own decisions, and, we put ourselves in these situations, but nothing happens without Hashem designing it to be, without Hashem planning it and putting it in our life. It's not like Hashem didn't know that you were going to be on different pages, and then he turns around and looks back and goes, oh, shucks, that actually was a terrible match, right? Hashem knew. Hashem doesn't say oops. And this is part of your divine plan. It's part of, the plan that was designed by Hashem for you with love, because there is growth and opportunities here for you that you only go through, particularly being in this particular situation. So it's not a mistake. It's an opportunity for growth. It could be really painful at times, or it could be really scary at times, but it was never a mistake. And, just keeping that in mind of, we're here, Hashem put us here because there's something that's in it over here for me to grow, an opportunity that would not be possible for me otherwise.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that feeling of like we made a mistake, comes from that part of us that thinks that we're in control.
Yeah.
And that we run our lives, and we really don't. We are given a mission by Hashem, and if definitely something as huge and fundamental as our husbands is obviously, if there's divine design for anything, and there is for everything, it's definitely in who we marry. And I'm sure you've seen this, and I've for sure seen this, that the places that feel most scary for us and are the hardest, our biggest fears, that's where the biggest,
absolutely,
deepest growth happens. Would you say, just to sort of close this, would you say that it's possible for a couple who have like different values when it comes to Yiddishkeit, like, is it possible for them to be happily married?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen it. That's why I'm not just saying it from, conjecture or what I think. I have seen couples who are on different pages and continue to be on different pages. It's not that, one of them has to switch to be on the same standard or level as the other one. They can each continue to be in their own space and in their own standard and still be deeply, deeply connected. Yes, I've seen it.
I think that's so incredible. I ultimately, I think that's how every relationship is at its core. We're not the same. But this is a unique challenge, and it really means, I think, going back to what you were saying before about understanding how Hashem values Shalom Bayis, it really means that we're working on our relationship with Hashem and being about what Hashem wants, not about what we want him to want or think he should want. Right. It's an incredible experience to be able to really work on that and live it truthfully. If we do have time, if we do have time, there's one big question that comes up. I hear from so many women when we talk about this, and we talk about, letting go of trying to manage your husband's religious standards. A big question that comes up is, but what about the kids? Certain values that I don't want my children to grow up with, and then they see their father doing those things or not doing the things that, certain things that I have an image of, like the fatherly example of what my husband should be doing in order for my kids to get a good Yiddische Chassidic chinuch. What about the kids? Tell us, Mushka, what about the kids? What's going to happen if they don't see their father going to minyan, and what's going to happen if they see their father watching too much sports and, making dirty jokes? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to my children? Yeah. The theoretical children, right? What do you tell a woman? How would you guide a woman in that scenario?
Yeah.
Or around that.
Right. So it's a really big fear, because we love our kids and want the absolute best for them. And, we have this idea in our head of what a good chinuch is for them. And then when we find that our spouse is not on par with that, that could be really scary for a woman. Like, I'm not going to be able to give my kids the chinuch that I want. So to that, I would say two things. I would, first of all, going back to the idea of ownership, is that if there are values that I want to instill in my children, I can go ahead and do that, right? If there's certain values that I want to imbue the home and things that I want to focus on, and, stories and values that I want them to grow up with. First of all, where am I putting them in our home? Where am I focusing on them? How am I bringing it to our children? So first of all, kind of like reclaiming that power of, if a woman is relying fully on her husband and he's not doing those things, then my kids will never get that chinuch. But to recognize that she is equal partner and she has so much to give over here, and she could definitely, instead of like living in that fear of they're not going to get, or they're getting the wrong messages, we want to be in that more proactive, like, what am I creating? What am I giving?
At the same time, taking on taking accountability. How am I? Where's my role? What am I generating?
Right.
Because we're inclined to notice what's not there and then forget that we play a role in
exactly.
For sure. I'm saying a massive role. Yeah. Okay. Amazing.
Exactly. At the same time, what about the things that, let's say, like, I can't go to Minyan and need my husband to go to Minyan to, to give my kids their values. Right. So now I'm like pushing him out the door. So, we would go back to the idea of the value and the importance of Shalom Bayis. And a really, really powerful and important thing to keep in mind is that, oftentimes we're very concerned about the negative consequences our husband's behavior or speech or whatever it is that he is or isn't doing, what that's going to have on our kids. And we forget the very, very also powerful truth that the Shalom Bayis of our home, the state of our marriages and the state of our relationships and the peace and love that exists between a mother and a father have a huge, huge, huge effect on a kid's chinuch. Like, we know this, how the kids turn out physically, how they turn out emotionally, how they turn out spiritually, very, very, very much depends on the relationship that they saw growing up between their parents. So oftentimes, in an effort to ensure that our kids get all the things they need and get a good chinuch and turn out right, we might accidentally be sabotaging that very thing by causing friction, disconnect, and tension with our husband over those, over that chinuch vision that we have. And we end up in the long term causing damage. Again, from good intentions, from a desire to want to give our kids the best, and from our desire to give our kids the best chinuch. But we have to keep in mind the role that Shalom Bayis plays in our kids' chinuch, and how having a close, loving, connected home and kids witnessing that in their parents, how hugely beneficial that is to how their chinuch turns out. And then also on a spiritual level, where we talk about Shalom being the vessel for all brachas. Lo matzah kadosh baruch hu kli machzik bracha ela hashalom. That Shalom is the vessel that holds all the brachas. At the end of the day, the chinuch of our children is in Hashem's hands. We do the best we can. We, role model as best as we could. We teach them the values we want them to grow up with. But at the end of the day, we need Hashem's bracha for how our children turn out. And the vessel for that bracha is Shalom Bayis. So again, we might accidentally be sabotaging the very thing that we're looking to create the most if we're causing a lack of Shalom Bayis over it.
Yeah. Wow.
It's big. I know it's big. It requires work. It requires processing. But
yeah, I think
I've seen how applying these ideas can bring so much relief to a relationship that then just creates so much space for each person to bring their best, and thereby create something so beautiful.
Yeah, I think what stood out to me also, when you were sharing that is again, we're looking at, my child's observing their father in this behavior, and how's that going to impact them? Forgetting that my child's observing my behavior. So my child is observing me disrespecting their father. That's not a Torah value. So I just, even in terms of the fear of, oh, my children are seeing things that they shouldn't see. Well, what are they seeing in me? And just like how you so beautifully described, like when we look at it from that calmer state, like when we just take a step back and we look at the bigger picture of what it is that we so deeply desire, and is our behavior getting us more or less of that? You know, sometimes you might have had this with a client, but one of the things that happens in coaching is if you meet resistance from a client about implementing a new way of thinking or being, we have a very simple question that we can ask in a coaching session, which is, I hear that this, you know, you're resisting what I'm bringing to you because it's new and it's different. And the question I have for you is what you were doing up until now working, right? So sometimes just that sobering question of, you know, this feels like a little bit scary to step into. But then we want to stop and ask ourselves, well, I'm trying to create a home that Hashem feels very present. And are the steps that I'm taking getting me that home? Yeah. Yes or no?
Yeah.
And if they are getting me that home, but there's a lack of Shalom Bayis, then do I fully understand the vision of, you know, a Hashem filled home?
Hashem-centered home, right?
Yeah. So I think it is hard and it is scary and it is big, but one of, you know, I think the results are the best, like the best guide, right? Like, am I getting, you know, is this getting me to where I want to go?
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
really getting
and
to
that clarity of like, oh yeah, I have been trying something because I want something so badly, and it's not getting me there. Could open us up to, like, now, as scary as it is to try something new, because where I've been going is just not getting me there.
Right. I think that's a very humbling realization, and maybe that's also why we resist it, because it's like, wow, I really have been generating the opposite of what I was trying to. And it's hard to accept, you know, that, but it gives the freedom of introducing something new that might actually get us what we want, and we'll achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve.
Yes.
Mushka, I feel like we can talk about this topic for hours and hours. There's so much more to say, and I know we didn't. We'll definitely listen to all our listeners. You have more questions for Mushka on this topic, email us and we'll bring Mushka back.
I'd love to come back. Please send in questions.
So, this was, I think, a great way to start and introduce you to the podcast audience. So I'm going to run through a few just cute and fun questions. Don't have to think about them too much. Say the first thing that pops into your head, just for our audience to get a bit of an opportunity to get to know you in a more general sense. So what is your favorite niggun?
The Pesach, actually. Been singing it a lot the past few days.
Oh, wow. Okay. I know that niggun is a beautiful, beautiful niggun. So maybe we'll have to link it for, is there somewhere that people could find it if they want to hear that?
Sure, you could find it on Spotify. I'm sure you could. Okay. I'm not sure. I've just been singing it. I'm not sure where to find it, but I'm sure.
I think the Pesach means the shepherd, right?
It does, yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful, like, emotion stirring niggun.
Wow. Okay, so check that out, the Pesach. Okay, your favorite book?
Oh, Full Harvest. It's a historical fiction. It's a big, big, thick book, but it's a good book.
You teach middle school and you've taught high school and you give workshops to women. What's your favorite age?
Adults. Hands down, adults.
We love you, teenagers. Does adults include teenagers or no?
Older teenagers.
What era would you live in if you could live at any time in history?
Ooh. I would say the shtetl, if it could come without, like, the pogroms and stuff.
Could slightly tweak shtetl life, then I'm down.
I love like the idea of that like simplistic life. Maybe at a time before technology kind of split our focus and our attention, and like being able to be present is now a struggle for me. But yeah, without the downsides of like the persecution and all of that.
Okay, I love that. So shtetl minus pogroms. Okay. Where do you feel like you connect more, through learning or davening?
Davening. Like I need to be focused. Like it's easy to also just daven and say the words and close the siddur and not have felt it make a difference. But when I'm focused, davening.
Okay. What's your favorite form of self-care?
Ooh. Journaling.
Cool. And any interesting hobby or something that you do that like people wouldn't expect about you?
I play the flute. Does that count?
She does play it really well. I can testify. Okay, Mushka, this was awesome. So cool.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's really, first of all, I love the podcast. I've been following the episodes and I love the insight that you and Hindi bring. And I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity to be on here as well.
Yeah. So amazing to be able to share your wisdom and clarity and just like have your head on straight. And it's such a beautiful person for women to be able to witness and learn from your experience and wisdom. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chayale.
We would love to hear your feedback, thoughts, and questions.
Please leave a comment below or email us at yourrelationShift@gmail.com.
Looking forward to connecting with you.
See you next time.